Don't sign it. The words came quietly, almost lost beneath the soft clink of crystal glasses and the low hum of conversation, but they hung in the air just long enough to matter. Daniel Whitmore didn't even look up. He smiled instead, the kind of calm, polished smile that had closed deals worth over $2 billion, and tapped his Mont Blanc pen lightly against the edge of the contract, as if timing the moment. Around him, the private dining room glowed under warm amber lights, a perfect blend of wealth and discretion. Italian marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Every detail curated, controlled, predictable, exactly the way Daniel liked it. Across the table, 3 investors watched him closely, their expressions measured, patient, but something about their stillness felt off. Not wrong, just too still, like they were waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks, silver catching the light, and finally glanced down at the final page. Numbers aligned. Terms favorable. Everything exactly as negotiated. He had reviewed this deal 3 times already. There was nothing left to question, nothing left to doubt. Mr. Whitmore, one of the investors said smoothly, his accent subtle, almost unplaceable, "We're ready when you are." Daniel nodded once, confident, unhurried. He'd built his reputation on precision, on never missing details, on seeing what others couldn't. That was the difference between him and everyone else in the room. Or so he believed. A hand appeared at the edge of the table. A simple porcelain cup was placed gently beside him, steam rising in thin, delicate lines. Coffee. Black. No sugar. Exactly how he always ordered it, though he hadn't spoken a word since sitting down. Daniel barely noticed. "Sir." The same quiet voice again, softer this time, closer. He paused, just for a fraction of a second. Not enough for anyone else to see. Slowly, he turned his head. She stood there, composed, her posture straight but unassuming, dressed in the standard black and white uniform of the restaurant staff. Nothing about her should have stood out. And yet something did. Maybe it was her eyes. Not nervous, not eager, just observant. Like she was listening to something no one else could hear. "They're not talking about the deal," she said gently. No urgency, no drama, just a statement. Daniel held her gaze for a moment, then exhaled a quiet, almost amused breath. "Everyone thinks they're smarter than they look," he replied, voice low, dismissive, already turning back to the document. A faint flicker crossed her expression. Not embarrassment, not fear, just stillness. She didn't argue, didn't insist. She simply nodded once and stepped back, disappearing into the rhythm of the room as if she had never been there at all. Daniel lifted his pen. The investors leaned in, just slightly, watching, waiting. The tip of the pen hovered above the signature line. 1 second, 2. Then, somewhere behind him, a glass slipped. A sharp, clean sound echoed across the room. Not loud, but wrong. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Chairs shifted, and suddenly, the perfectly controlled space felt different. Daniel's hand froze in the air, not because of the sound, but because, for the first time that evening, he noticed something he hadn't before. The silence. Not the comfortable kind, not the polite kind. This silence had weight. He slowly lowered the pen without signing. And for reasons he couldn't explain, his eyes moved, not to the contract, not to the investors, but to the place where she had been standing just moments ago. She was still there, watching, waiting, as if she already knew what was about to happen next. Daniel did not sign. The pen remained between his fingers, suspended, as if the weight of the room had suddenly shifted onto it. He set it down slowly, deliberately, the faint click against the polished table louder than it should have been. No one spoke. Not the investors. Not the assistant standing quietly near the door. Even the distant murmur from the main dining area seemed to fade into something distant and irrelevant. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze returning to the men across from him. But this time he was not looking at their faces. He was watching their hands, their posture, the subtle exchange of glances that lasted less than a second but said more than any contract ever could. There it was again, that stillness. Too controlled, too prepared. "Is there a problem, Mr. Whitmore?" the man in the center asked, his tone calm, but now there was something beneath it. Not impatience, not concern, something sharper. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the coffee that had been placed beside him, lifting it just enough to feel the warmth through the porcelain. Fresh. Recently poured. Perfect timing. His eyes flicked, just once, toward the far side of the room. She was no longer standing still. She was moving now, quietly, seamlessly, as if nothing had happened. But her attention had not left the table. He could feel it. Watching. Waiting. Repeat that last point, Daniel said finally, setting the cup back down untouched. The investors exchanged a brief look. Which part? The revenue transfer clause, Daniel replied, his voice even, controlled. The one you mentioned 2 minutes ago. A pause. Barely noticeable. But it was there. Of course, the man said, offering a thin smile. It is standard language. Daniel nodded slowly, as if accepting the answer, but his eyes did not soften. Then it should be easy to explain again. Silence stretched, thin and fragile. One of the men shifted in his seat. Another adjusted his tie. Small movements. Controlled, but no longer perfectly in sync. And then, from behind them, a voice. Calm. Clear. Uninvited. He said the funds would move before the signature is finalized. Every head turned. She stood just a few steps away now, her presence no longer part of the background. No longer invisible. The room seemed to hold its breath. The man at the center frowned slightly. I do not believe this concerns, he also said. She continued, her tone unchanged, that once the transfer is initiated, the terms can be adjusted without requiring your approval. Daniel did not move, but something in his expression shifted. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind that comes when a missing piece finally locks into place. That is not accurate, one of the investors said quickly, his voice tighter now. There may have been a misunderstanding. She tilted, her head slightly, not challenging, not defensive, just certain. Then you should clarify it. In English. Another pause. Longer this time. The air in the room felt different now. Heavier. No one reached for their glass. No one checked their phone. The performance had cracked, and beneath it, something real was beginning to show. Daniel folded his hands on the table, his gaze steady, no longer divided between the contract and the people across from him. Go ahead, he said quietly. Clarify. No one smiled this time. No one spoke. Not immediately. The man in the center held Daniel's gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then leaned back slightly, folding his hands as if reclaiming control of the room through posture alone. There seems to be a misunderstanding, he said, slower this time, each word measured. The clause refers to a preliminary allocation, nothing more. Daniel did not blink. Then say it clearly, he replied. In English. Right now. The man's smile returned, but it no longer reached his eyes. He glanced briefly to his right, then back again, as if calculating something that had just changed. The funds, he began, would be positioned ahead of final execution to streamline the closing process. It is a matter of efficiency. Silence. Daniel tilted his head just slightly. Positioned where? Another pause. Smaller this time. But enough. One of the other investors shifted, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly around the edge of the table. The rhythm was gone now. The perfect coordination. What remained was hesitation. And Daniel noticed everything. He always had. In a holding account, the man answered finally. Temporary. The word landed flat. Daniel's gaze did not move. Under whose control? No one answered right away. And that was the answer. A quiet breath moved through the room. Not relief, not tension, something in between. The kind of moment where truth does not need to be spoken because it has already revealed itself. Daniel leaned back fully now, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharper than before. You asked me to sign a document, he said calmly, that allows you to move capital before the agreement is finalized into an account I do not control. No denial came. Not directly. The man across from him spread his hands slightly, a gesture meant to soften the edges. It is standard in certain markets. Daniel gave a small nod. Not mine. The words were quiet. Final. Across the room, a glass was set down gently. Someone exhaled. The tension did not explode. It dissolved. Slowly, like a structure losing its foundation one piece at a time. Daniel reached forward and closed the folder without looking at it again. The sound was soft, but it carried weight. Decision made. Conversation over. But he did not stand. Not yet. Instead, his gaze shifted, not to the men across from him, but past them. To her. She had not moved closer. Had not inserted herself further. She simply stood where she was, hands at her sides, expression calm, as if none of this surprised her, as if she had seen it all before. For a moment, their eyes met. No words passed between them. None were needed. Daniel gave the slightest nod. Not gratitude spoken aloud. Not acknowledgement for the room. Just a recognition. Clear. Undeniable. Then he looked back at the investors, his voice steady, composed. "We are done here." No raised tone. No anger. Just certainty. Chairs shifted. Papers gathered. The illusion of control, carefully constructed just minutes ago, now reduced to quiet movements and polite exits. As they stood to leave, the man in the center paused, glancing once more toward Daniel, then briefly toward her. Something unreadable passed through his expression before it disappeared behind a practiced smile. And then they were gone. The room felt larger without them. Lighter, but not empty. Daniel remained seated for a moment longer, his hand resting near the untouched coffee, his mind replaying the last 5 minutes with precision. Every word, every pause, every look. And beneath it all, one simple truth settled into place. He had not seen it, but she had. The door closed behind them with a soft, final click, and for a moment, Daniel Whitmore remained exactly where he was, seated at the center of a table that no longer felt like his battlefield, but something quieter, something unfamiliar. The city lights beyond the glass stretched endlessly, reflections flickering across the polished surface in front of him, but his focus was no longer on the skyline, or the deal, or even the loss he had just avoided. It was on the space to his left. The untouched coffee had cooled slightly, a thin layer of steam still rising, but fading. He reached for it, finally taking a slow sip, more out of habit than desire, and then set it down again with deliberate care. Precision, control, that was who he had always been. But tonight, for the first time in years, something had slipped through, something he had not seen. "You knew," he said quietly, not turning yet. There was no response at first, only the faint sound of footsteps approaching, measured and unhurried. Then she was there again, not across the room this time, but standing just a few feet away, within the quiet space that had once belonged to power and negotiation. "I suspected," she replied. Her voice carried the same calm as before. No pride, no hesitation, just truth. Daniel turned then, studying her more carefully than he had allowed himself to earlier. Up close, the details became clearer. The steadiness in her posture, the way her eyes held focus without demanding attention. There was nothing accidental about her presence, nothing ordinary. "Based on what?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the empty glass one of the investors had left behind, lifting it gently from the table as if completing a task that had been interrupted. "They switched languages halfway through the conversation," she said. "Not to include you, to exclude you." Daniel's expression remained still, but his mind moved quickly, replaying fragments he had dismissed as irrelevant. The tone shifts, the pauses, the glances he had nearly ignored. "That happens in international negotiations," he said, though the words sounded less certain than they would have 10 minutes ago. She nodded slightly. "Yes, but not when they want your signature." The simplicity of the statement settled into the room like a quiet truth that did not need emphasis. Daniel leaned back, considering her words, measuring them the way he measured everything. Data, patterns, risk. And yet, this was not numbers. This was instinct, awareness, something harder to quantify. "And you understood everything they said?" he asked. "Enough," she replied. Again, no embellishment. No need to impress. Just enough. That word lingered. Daniel exhaled slowly, a faint shift in his shoulders, not exhaustion, but release. The kind that comes when a decision has already been made, and the weight of it no longer needs to be carried. "You stopped me from making a mistake," he said. This time, she did not deflect. She did not step back, but she did not step forward either. "You stopped yourself," she said. "I just spoke." The room fell quiet again, but it was no longer heavy, no longer uncertain. It was clear, clean. And for the first time that evening, Daniel Whitmore allowed a different kind of thought to enter his mind. Not about the deal, not about the loss, but about her. "What is your name?" he asked. A simple question, one he should have asked hours ago. She met his gaze, steady as before. "Emily," she said. Just that. No last name, no explanation, just Emily. And somehow, it was enough to change everything. Emily did not move after saying her name. She simply stood there, as if that single word had already completed her part in the conversation. Daniel studied her for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, more to himself than to her, as if placing that name somewhere precise in his memory. Emily. Simple. Unadorned. Yet it carried a weight he could not quite explain. He pushed his chair back slowly and stood, the movement controlled, measured, the way he approached everything in his life. But there was a difference now. Subtle. Almost invisible. He was not standing to dominate the room. He was standing to meet her at eye level. Emily. He repeated, testing the sound of it, then paused. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation, words suddenly felt less automatic. You said you understood enough, he continued. Enough to know they were setting terms outside the agreement. She nodded once. Yes. That is not something most people would catch, he said. It was not a compliment. Not exactly. It was an observation. Precise. Evaluated. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she reached for another empty glass, aligning it carefully with the others on her tray, her movements quiet, efficient, almost invisible again. Most people are not listening for it, she said. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition. That answer told him more than a longer explanation ever could. Listening. Not hearing. Not reacting. Listening. The distinction mattered. He glanced briefly at the closed contract on the table, then back at her. Where did you learn to listen like that? The question hung between them, softer than his previous ones, but more personal. Emily paused this time. Not long. Just enough to choose her words. Places where missing details costs more than money, she said. Daniel did not press further. He understood what it meant when someone answered without giving everything away. He had built his entire career on that principle. Still, something about her restraint did not feel defensive. It felt intentional, like she was not hiding. She was simply choosing what mattered. He let out a quiet breath, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the table between them. Clean. Minimal. His name embossed in understated silver. If you ever decide that this, he gestured lightly to the room, to the uniform, to the quiet space she moved through, is not where you want to stay, call me. The offer was simple, direct, no conditions stated, no explanation needed. Emily looked at the card, but she did not reach for it right away. Her eyes lingered there for a moment, then lifted back to his. Why? She asked. Daniel did not hesitate this time. Because you saw what I did not. The answer was honest, unfiltered, and that, more than anything, shifted the space between them. Emily considered him for a moment longer, then finally stepped forward and picked up the card, holding it lightly between her fingers as if it carried no more weight than paper. You would be surprised, she said quietly, how often people miss things they think are beneath them. Daniel gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Not amused, not defensive, just aware. I was, he admitted. The silence that followed was different again. Not tension, not uncertainty, something steadier, mutual. Emily slipped the card into the small pocket of her apron without ceremony, without promise, without rejection. Just placement. Then she lifted her tray, her posture returning to its earlier rhythm, ready to disappear back into the flow of the room. But before she turned away, she paused. Just slightly. Next time, she said, her voice calm as ever. Listen before you smile. Daniel did not respond immediately. He simply watched her walk away, her figure blending once again into the background of polished service and quiet movement. But this time, he did not lose sight of her. Not even for a second. The room slowly returned to motion, but not to what it had been before. Conversations resumed in careful tones. Glasses lifted, then set back down with more awareness than before. The illusion had been broken, and even those who had not understood what happened could feel that something had shifted. Daniel remained standing for a moment longer, his gaze still following the path Emily had taken until she disappeared behind the soft swing of the service door. Then he looked back at the table. The contract sat there, closed, untouched, as if it had never mattered. He picked it up, not to review it, but to feel its weight one last time before setting it aside completely. It was not the paper. It was the decision behind it. He had almost signed, almost trusted the surface, almost ignored the one voice that did not belong to power. That thought stayed with him as he stepped away from the table and moved toward the window. The city stretched below, miles of light and movement. Every building holding its own stories, its own negotiations, its own silent warnings that were either heard or missed. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks again, a habit he had not realized he was repeating, then stopped. For the first time, he noticed the gesture itself. Automatic, unquestioned, like the smile he had given earlier. He let his hands fall to his sides. Behind him, the door opened quietly, and his assistant stepped in, tablet in hand, already moving into the rhythm of the next task. "The car is ready, sir," she said, "and your next meeting has been pushed to tomorrow morning." Daniel nodded once. Efficient, controlled. The world was already resetting around him, but he did not move toward the exit. Not yet. "Reschedule everything else for the evening," he said instead. His assistant paused, surprised for a fraction of a second before recovering. "Everything, everything," he repeated. His tone left no room for adjustment. She nodded and stepped back, already making the necessary updates. Silence returned again, but this time it was chosen. Intentional. Daniel turned from the window and walked slowly across the room, not toward the exit, but toward the service door. The same door Emily had disappeared through. He did not rush. He did not hesitate either. Just a steady pace, measured, like every step carried purpose he had only just discovered. The door opened with a soft push, revealing a different world on the other side. Narrow hallways, stainless steel surfaces, the quiet efficiency of movement behind the scenes. No marble, no skyline, just work. Real, immediate, focused. Staff moved past him, some glancing briefly, recognizing him, others too occupied to notice at all. The air felt different here, less controlled, more honest. He stepped further inside, his presence out of place but not unwelcome, and paused as he scanned the room. For a moment, he did not see her, just motion. Then, near the far counter, she appeared again. Emily stood with her back partially turned, speaking quietly to another server, her tone calm, her gestures minimal, as if nothing extraordinary had happened just minutes ago, as if she had not just shifted the course of a decision worth millions. Daniel did not interrupt right away. He watched. The way she listened, the way she nodded, not to agree, but to acknowledge. The way she moved without drawing attention, yet never missing anything. It was the same presence he had overlooked before. The same presence that had just changed everything. Finally, he stepped forward, not as a CEO entering a space he owned, but as a man who had realized he had something left to learn. "Emily," he said, just her name. No title, no distance. She turned, and for the first time, it was not her observing him. It was him, fully aware, choosing to see. Emily turned at the sound of her name, her expression unchanged, as if she had expected him to follow. Not surprised, not impressed, just aware. The other server beside her glanced between them, sensing something unspoken, then quietly excused herself, leaving the space open without needing to be told. Daniel stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak without raising his voice, far enough to respect the boundary she had never needed to define. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The background noise of the kitchen filled the silence. Plates being set down, orders called out, the steady rhythm of work continuing, untouched by the shift that had happened in the other room. "You did not have to say anything," Daniel said finally. His tone was even, but there was something beneath it now. Not authority, not expectation, something closer to acknowledgement. Emily met his gaze, steady as before. "No," she said, "I did not." The simplicity of the answer lingered. Daniel nodded once, absorbing it, then continued. "And yet you did." She held his eyes for a moment longer, then looked briefly past him, as if checking the flow of the room, before returning her attention. "Because you were about to make a decision you could not take back," she said. "And you were not seeing all of it." Daniel let out a quiet breath, not defensive, not dismissive, just accepting. "I have built my career on seeing what others miss," he said. "That is what I am known for." Emily tilted her head slightly, considering his words, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That is what you believe," she replied. No challenge in her tone, no judgment, just a statement placed carefully between them. Daniel did not respond right away. Instead, he studied her again, but this time he was not looking for answers. He was listening. The way she chose words, the way she left space between them. It was intentional. All of it. "And what do you believe?" he asked after a moment. Emily's gaze softened, not emotionally, but in focus, as if narrowing in on something more precise. That people see what they expect to see, she said, and ignore what does not fit. The words settled in quietly, but they carried weight. Daniel looked down briefly, his mind replaying the moment from earlier. The smile, the pen, the contract, the voice he had nearly dismissed. It had not fit his expectation, so he had ignored it. "You think I ignored you," he said. Emily did not correct him. She did not agree either. She simply answered, "You smiled before you listened." That was all. No accusation. No need for more. The truth was already clear. Daniel gave a small nod, slower this time, more deliberate. "That will not happen again," he said. It was not a promise made lightly. It was a decision. Emily watched him for a moment, as if weighing the words, not for sincerity, but for understanding. Then she gave a slight nod in return. Not approval, just acknowledgement. A quiet agreement that something had shifted. Around them, the kitchen continued its rhythm, untouched, but the space between them had changed. No longer defined by roles. Not waitress and CEO. Not service and authority. Just two people standing in the same moment, aware of what had just happened. Daniel glanced toward the door behind him, where the polished world waited, then back at her. "You said missing details can cost more than money," he said. "What does it cost?" Emily did not hesitate this time. "Everything that comes after," she replied. The answer landed without emphasis, but it stayed. Daniel held her gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, as if closing a loop he had not realized was open. "Then I suppose I owe you more than a thank you," he said. Emily's expression did not change, but there was a slight shift in her posture, almost imperceptible. "You owe yourself a better habit," she said. Daniel almost smiled. Not the polished version. Not the one used in boardrooms and negotiations. Something quieter. Real. "I am working on that," he replied. And for the first time, it sounded true. Daniel did not leave immediately. The door behind him remained open, just slightly, as if the world outside was waiting for him to return to it, to step back into the rhythm he had always known. But he stayed where he was. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time, he was choosing not to rush. Around them, the kitchen continued its steady pace. Orders moved from voice to action. Plates passed from hand to hand. Nothing paused for reflection. Nothing waited. And yet, in the middle of that motion, there was a stillness between them that felt deliberate. Emily reached for a stack of clean glasses, aligning them with quiet precision, her movements uninterrupted by his presence, but not unaware of it either. Daniel watched for a moment, then spoke again, his tone lower now, less like a question, more like something forming as he said it. "You are not just a waitress." It was not framed as a guess. It was a conclusion. Emily did not stop what she was doing. "That is what the uniform says," she replied. Daniel shook his head slightly, not dismissing her answer, but moving past it. "You listen like someone who has been responsible for outcomes," he said. "Not just tasks." She placed the last glass down and turned to face him fully again, her expression unchanged, but her attention sharper now. "And you assume responsibility only looks one way," she said. Daniel considered that, then gave a small nod. "I used to," he admitted. The words came easier now, not because he was losing control, but because he was no longer trying to hold it in the same way. Emily studied him for a brief moment, as if recalibrating something she had already decided about him. Then she stepped slightly closer, just enough to lower her voice without changing her tone. "What almost happened out there," she said, "was not about language." Daniel did not interrupt. "It was about attention," she continued. "They did not need to hide anything. They just needed you to stop looking." The statement landed deeper than the earlier ones. Not because it was louder, but because it connected everything. The smile, the confidence, the assumption that nothing could be hidden from him. Daniel let the silence sit for a moment, then nodded slowly. "And I gave them that," he said. "For a moment," Emily replied. "Not correction, not comfort, just precision." He exhaled quietly, a subtle shift in his posture again, as if something inside him had realigned. "Not broken, refined. You see patterns," he said, "before they become problems." Emily did not confirm it. She did not deny it either. She simply held his gaze, letting him reach his own conclusion. Daniel glanced briefly around the kitchen, then back at her. "Why stay here?" he asked. The question was not about judgment. It was about curiosity. Real this time. Emily's eyes moved past him for a moment, following the flow of the room, the quiet coordination, the unnoticed details that kept everything running. Because here, she said, people show you who they are when they think it does not matter. Daniel absorbed that, his mind already connecting it to everything he had built, everything he had trusted, everything he had nearly signed away just minutes ago. And out there, he asked, nodding slightly toward the dining room beyond. Emily's gaze returned to him, steady as ever. Out there, they show you who they want you to believe they are. The difference settled in. Clear. Undeniable. Daniel gave a faint nod, slower this time, as if sealing the understanding into place. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The kitchen noise filled the space again, but it no longer distracted. It framed the silence. Finally, Daniel stepped back slightly, not retreating, but creating space. Then I have been paying attention to the wrong version of people, he said. Emily did not correct him. She simply answered, You have been paying attention to the loudest one. The word stayed with him, not as criticism, as clarity. And for the first time that night, Daniel Whitmore understood that the most important thing he had almost missed was not written in the contract. It was standing right in front of him the entire time. Daniel stood there for a moment longer, letting her last words settle into something deeper than thought. Not something to analyze, something to remember. Around them, the rhythm of the kitchen continued, steady and grounded, untouched by the shift that had just taken place between two people who, minutes ago, existed in completely different worlds. He glanced once more toward the open door behind him, where the polished dining room waited, where decisions were made with signatures and smiles and carefully measured words. Then he looked back at her. Emily was already moving again, returning to her work with the same quiet precision, as if the conversation had simply been another task completed. No hesitation. No need to hold on to the moment. She had said what needed to be said. Daniel understood something then that he had not understood before. She did not stay in moments. She moved through them. That was the difference. He reached into his jacket pocket again, not for another card, not for his phone, but simply out of habit, then stopped halfway and let his hand fall. Even that small movement felt different now, less automatic, more chosen. Emily, he said once more. She paused, turning her head slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge him. You said people show who they are when they think it does not matter, he said. What did I show? The question was quiet, not defensive, not searching for approval, just honest. Emily turned fully this time, meeting his gaze with the same steady calm she had held from the beginning. She did not answer immediately. She looked at him the way she had looked at everything else that night. Carefully, completely. You showed that you were used to being right, she said, and that you expect the room to confirm it. Daniel nodded slowly. There was no denial in him now, only recognition. And now, he asked. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible shift of her head. Now you are asking, she said. The difference was small, but it was everything. Daniel exhaled quietly, a breath that felt less like release and more like recalibration. He glanced once more around the kitchen, taking in the movement, the unnoticed precision, the quiet awareness that had been there all along. Then he looked back at her, and for the first time, there was no distance left in his expression, no role to maintain, no image to protect, just clarity. Then I will keep asking, he said. Emily did not smile. She did not need to. She simply nodded once, accepting the statement for what it was. Not a promise to her, a decision for himself. The moment held for a second longer, then passed, not with finality, but with quiet completion. Daniel stepped back, turning toward the door, but this time his movement carried something new. Not urgency, not control, awareness. As he reached the threshold, he paused briefly, just long enough to look back one last time. Emily had already returned to her work, her presence blending once again into the flow of the room, unnoticed by most, essential in ways few would ever understand. He did not call her name again. He did not interrupt. He simply watched for a moment, then gave a small nod, not to her, but to the truth he had almost missed. And then he stepped out. The door closed softly behind him, separating the quiet world of observation from the louder world of decisions. But something had crossed with him. Not visible, not spoken, just carried. And that night, for the first time in years, Daniel Whitmore walked into his next room without a smile ready. He walked in ready to listen,